Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is running for government, period, end of sentence. How the electoral chips fall, I don't really know. And I guess we'll address that after the fact. You know, I can read the polls as well as other people can read the polls. I don't know, but you know, that's in March of 2015, and we have to be worried about what's going to be happening in October 2015. So I'm a little, how should we say, less sanguine than my colleagues about collaboration, and our experience of collaboration didn't work out quite so well last time. Again, be careful what you wish for.
Okay, we have some questions from UBC, and I noticed one's addressed to Matthew Kelway, one's addressed to John McKay, and one isn't addressed to a particular speaker, so I'll give that one to Elizabeth. The grammar here fails me in some places, but I'll do the best I can. I'm also here. U of T snob, well, touche. Question for Matthew is, how do you envisage the National Energy Board in Canada's future with pipelines? And is the NEB doing enough to consider the effects of climate change? The question for John McKay. You have stated that a Liberal government's policy would build on carbon prices or policies, presumably, already in place in several provinces, including Alberta. Yet even with the carbon price, virtually all of Canada's emissions growth is projected to come from Alberta. How would a government ensure that national emissions targets are met when a province's carbon price isn't sufficient? And here's one from ABC. How do you balancing addressing, that's the grammar, carbon emissions from the demand versus the supply?
The one without addressing is referring to?
Yes, so
Well, I think about how they talk.
maybe you can make up the grammar. So, Matthew, you want to respond about the NEB and Canada's future with pipelines?
Yeah, I think the issue, and Tom Mulcair talks about this all the time, and one of the reasons that we say no to any pipeline at this point in time is that we have a assessment system through the NEB to which one simply can't say yes. There is inappropriate grounds that the NEB uses to assess these matters. Now, there's the changes. You know, we went into 2011 with proposals to change that assessment system, the environmental assessment system, and then, of course, in 2012, I think it was 2012 budget, the act was drastically changed, and the scope. Well, let me just call it the process that the NEB uses to assess pipelines was changed dramatically as well. So limited scope of participation was one of the things that they did. They limited the grounds upon which assessments can be made. And so one of the things we've talked about, and it needs to happen, is changing what can be considered by the NEB in these assessment processes. And one is to look at cumulative impacts as a starter of any project to be assessed, including pipelines. Two is to look at alternatives, so allow the NEB to assess alternatives to any particular project. And third is to take explicitly the issue of climate change and global warming into account in making your assessment of any project. So. And of course, part of this process is to increase, has to be increased participation. Participation is extremely limited for the NEB now. So with those three new assessment criteria, we would propose to go into, under an NEB government post-2015, into a public consultation process for the public to start to inform what environmental assessments look like and what the authority of the National Energy Board would actually be for assessing pipeline projects.
Thank you.
So just do want to remind people what the question was, or I'll remind people of the question, which is that, how are you going to do this? Not easy, as I said. Clearly, BC is the gold standard here. They're pricing their carbon at about $30 a ton. I think that Quebec is in the order of about $15 a ton. Presumably Ontario will be somewhere similar to that. And none of those numbers are close to what they need to be. And particularly in the system in Alberta is not a very effective system, and prices tons way below where it should be priced. I would not be enthusiastic about those negotiations. They'll be very difficult negotiations. Jim Prentice, the Premier of Alberta, is a former environment minister. I know he gets it because we talked to him. But having said that he gets it, doesn't mean that he doesn't have other realities. Most significant political reality he's facing right now is a big hole in his budget, something in the order of about 25% of his revenues are carbon dependent. So I don't anticipate that those discussions will be easy. However, if we are going to have a national system, we can't have some provinces carrying the load and others riding for free. So the mix of incentives and penalties will be a delicate one. And I think that, but I would start those negotiations should have started 9 years ago, frankly. But those negotiations, in my mind, would have to start very early, and there would have to be very tough negotiations, because the industry in Alberta in particular feels like it's having real difficulties, and it is. I mean, when you're shutting down multiple billions of dollars worth of projects, they're going to be very tough to negotiate.
So I'm trying to understand the question I
So
got.
was I.
But before you, on pipeline politics, and I don't want to put Matt on the spot, but my understanding is that that at this point, the Greens are the only party opposing all Energy East, Keystone, Enbridge, and Kinder Morgan on principle. And I understand the NDP, that the NDP had problems with the NDP process, is why they wouldn't be prepared. But I haven't heard a strong statement yet, and I'd love to be wrong on this, but I've not heard the NDP say they're against Kinder Morgan or against Energy East. The last thing I saw Mr. Mulcair say was that he was bullish on Energy East. I will also, since I've said something negative about Mr. Mulcair for the first time here tonight, have to say that when Justin Trudeau said the federal government doesn't have to lead and can sort of coordinate the provinces lightly, there's very large nonsense sign flashes in my head. That is absolute nonsense, and I hope Justin Trudeau is prepared to do better than that. Now, the consumption piece here, which I think is the question I have, is how do you see balancing addressing carbon emissions from the demand versus the supply? What I'm hoping that this is demand side management versus supply side management, and how do you go at reducing emissions fast enough? Demand side management, supply side management, I think are essentially, you have to do everything you can on both sides, but there's a temporal difference. Your short-term wins are all on demand side management. You can make a steeper reduction in greenhouse gases for every dollar invested by retrofitting buildings than almost anything else you can do. We have about 30% of our energy inefficiency, greenhouse gases in the economy, about 30% is our built infrastructure. We are heating the outdoors in the winter and cooling it in summer. And we're doing it with inefficient lighting overhead. So that's a huge winner, and particularly since it's as a stimulus effort probably with revolving loans to fund it the way that the green municipal funds work in the Canadian Federation of Municipalities. What you can do is you have all the trades working to go out and retrofit buildings, because as Amory Lovins said so famously so very long ago, a barrel of oil saved is just as valuable as a barrel of oil found. So megawatts, we've got to go after energy efficiency in an aggressive way. But then while you're doing that, at the same time, you're building up your shift in supply. So your supply side management is replacing fossil fuel sources of energy, particularly our electricity sector should be zero fossil. We have really, really dirty fuel being used in one of the power plants in Nova Scotia. It's pet coke from the bitumen mixed with diluents that get all the way down to Detroit, and then they separate out, and they have a refinery, and they have these piles of what they call pet coke, which then gets shipped to Nova Scotia. So for those of you listening at Dalhousie, Pointe-Coupon is burning pet coke. You look at the coal-fired power plant system, the bulk of Alberta's electricity sector, the bulk of Saskatchewan's electricity sector. Thank you again to Ontario for shutting down coal-fired power plants. But it takes a while to ramp up renewables. So it's a time lag issue. The fastest, most cost-effective reduction in greenhouse gases comes from energy efficiency and conservation, and at the same time, you have to build up your renewable capacity.
Okay. I don't know if we've got Dalhousie on, but I've got a lot of questions from Toronto. Okay. Toronto. What we haven't heard, let me just read the question. What role, if any, do you see for nuclear energy in the transition away from fossil fuels? So let's start. Nuclear.
Nuclear, okay, well, can I go back to the economics that Elizabeth's talking about very briefly, about $225 a ton, which I left alone, Elizabeth, and the fee dividend stuff. If we are talking about rapid demand response to the need for fossil fuels, the fee and dividend and your plan for government revenue simply doesn't work. Where does the revenue come from? Where does the infrastructure come from to build these things? There is nothing there. But it's moving pricing, you know, and so and I want to talk about Tom's position on the pipeline. If we have a system in place, an NP system in place that is fundamentally a democratic system that allows Canadians to participate in the issue of pipelines, then it is not a matter of principle. It is a matter of people being able to come and put to a board alternatives, the issue of climate change, the issue of cumulative impacts, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a process, if you have the right criteria, and in the context of making oil uneconomic through demand destruction for fossil fuels, it changes the entire system that we are looking at. On the issue of nuclear, we have a huge problem facing us now, which is dealing with nuclear waste and what to do with that. This is not, the nuclear power is not a sustainable form of power. It leaves lethal, toxic waste for future generations. The IPCC in their wedge has suggested there's a place for it. 50% of our power in Ontario is coming from nuclear right now. But new build nuclear is clearly not a solution to this issue of sustainable life on this planet.
So quickly to respond to Matthew.
I haven't mentioned this, by the way. Matthew's wonderful, and he's the only other federal member of parliament who marched to New York with me. I just want to mention that, because now I'm going to have to say.
I thought you were marching with me, Elizabeth.
Well, everybody there knew me. Not everybody. There were 400,000 people. What am I saying? Really cool march. And we were all together. A lot of 350.org buses from Toronto that came down. Fantastic. We marched with each other. So here's the thing. Fee and dividend is being addressed. I think a lot of you will know Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizens Climate Lobby completely won over the membership of the Green Party. So it's a policy resolution passed by our membership. And it actually is very exciting because what it also does is one of our priorities as a party is to get to eliminating poverty through guaranteed livable income. So a direct check to everybody is a start. I mean, it's obviously not a guaranteed livable income to deliver $5,000 to every Canadian over 18, but it's the beginning because disproportionately, this check will mean more to people who are low income than people who are very high income levels. And what it is not only is it revenue neutral, the fee never really comes into, it'd be about $1.5 billion, it never really comes into the federal government revenues because it immediately gets cut into checks and sent back out to Canadians, which is why it has such an attraction across Canada through the work of the Citizens Climate Lobby. So, good point. So if that's where your money's going, where do you get the money for infrastructure? Well, you have to tax more. You're going to have to tax the corporate tax rate. Maybe the largest and most profitable corporations in this country are taxed half the tax rate that they would be paying if they were in the U.S. We have, thanks to Stephen Harper, we have the lowest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world, half that of the United States. And they called them the job creators when they brought this in. Job creators, they've just kept, they're hoarding the money. The large corporations have over $600 billion right now sloshing around in corporate bank accounts, quoting Mark Carney again. He's the one who dubbed it the dead money. So, some of you may know that I like my Bible, so I want that dead money like Lazarus to rise up and walk. I want to go out there and create jobs, and to do that, we tax the corporations more. Okay, I'll move on because our whole tax plan will come out with our budget. Nuclear energy is a future technology whose time has passed. From a long time ago, nuclear energy has no role in replacing greenhouse gases. There are nuclear facilities that we will have for some time. We should build no new ones. If you're looking again at the criteria of $1 invested for maximizing reductions of greenhouse gases, where do you put it? The last place in the world you put it was in nuclear power. On the economics alone, nuclear does not work.
Well, I'm waiting for fee and dividend and dead money to be walking on water. The last chap that tried that got crucified for his troubles. I hope that's not a political. We get about, in Ontario, we get about 50-55% of our electricity from nuclear. And the problem is that there's no real happy choices here. Dalton McGuinty didn't get a lot of credit for, in fact, he gets a lot of criticism for getting us off coal. And that was
Clean Air Alliance that did.
I imagine Mr. McGuinty had something to do with it. And as a consequence, I'm told, I'm not sure that it's absolutely accurate, that in the GTA, we've not had a smog day in the last 2 or 3 years. That's a pretty significant accomplishment, and for which Mr. McGuinty or anyone else hasn't got a lot of credit. In fact, if you talk to a conservative, there's a conservative on this panel, they whine to you about the cost of electricity and tell you about the competitive disadvantage that we have with New York State in particular, but I assume other states as well. So these are not happy choices. There's not a lot of Niagara Falls available to produce the power that we need. Coal is clearly out the door. Oil and gas, well, we don't have a lot in this province, and one of the things that's kind of made things happen for Obama has been the fracking revolution. Well, I think a lot of people are taking a second look at that and saying, well, maybe this isn't quite the nirvana that was thought to be in the first instance. So, and then if you talk to the other folks, well, we'll replace it with solar and wind and biomass and things of that nature. And clearly, those things are ramping up. Clearly, Ontario is poised to be a leader in that area. Clearly, there's 27,000 direct jobs and 275,000 indirect jobs that are generated by clean energy. I just don't know that in the short term, and by the short term I mean my lifetime, that we will be actually able to wind down nuclear power stations. We may certainly stop building them, and then hopefully then start to decommission as we replace nuclear with other forms, hopefully, of clean energy.
Thank you. Well, we've got, I think, 5 minutes left. So do you want me to leave it up to the panels to say whatever they'd like, or should I just throw a couple of more questions to them and we can end on that note? Okay, the latter? The form. What's that? Okay, closing statements from the panelists. Take 2-3 minutes each. I'm sorry we couldn't handle all of your questions. There are many excellent questions here.
Me first?
Sure.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity tonight to talk about this issue. And there's been almost a religious theme here this evening. So and just spread the gospel then of ending this scourge of climate change, yes. I believe, coming back to the PR issue, I think, actually it was the parliamentary secretary that asked me after my speech on C619, who wants this? I think the answer is Canadians want it. And I think that's right across the country that Canadians want it. We talked about intergenerational change, but I think we do ourselves a tremendous disservice to talk in those terms. We are actually, I think, talking about our children, John's grandchildren, Elizabeth's children and grandchildren. That's who we're talking about when we're talking about responding to this issue and responding with urgency and rapidity. And the science is being laid out for all of us. We all know it, and I don't know that there's any point in talking about that any further. The latest IPCC report is talking in science terms or scientist terminology about levels of probability that mean, yes, this is going to happen. And so it falls